Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archeo Viking. In lieu of recent events in the U.S. education system, where accurate history, is trying to be taken out of school curriculums um, under criticisms of critical race theory, or more commonly known as CRT, specifically in states such as Texas, Mississippi, Florida, and my home state, Georgia. I have decided to create two videos, one today and one tomorrow, on lesser known events in U.S. history, specifically revolving around the Cherokee, one of the many indigenous peoples the U.S. Committed horrible atrocities to and attempted to commit genocide to. Sorry, did commit a genocide to. Um, so that's what this video today is going to cover. Now, before I get into that, I want to make very clear to anyone who may be watching and may decide to comment on the subject, I have no dog or role at all in whether or not critical race theory should be taught in public schools. In fact, it is not being taught in public schools. That is a myth. Critical race theory is only taught in grad school, specifically law school and other related schools, as it is a lens to look at past laws and current laws in history. So it is a method of looking at these things, not the history itself. And is not and has never been nor will not be taught in grade school K through 12. What my role is here is whether or not accurate history is being taught in public schools, which is not the same thing as critical race theory. And the erasure of the U.S.'s history under the guise that it may or may not hurt people's feelings is a disservice to U.S. history and a disservice to the indigenous peoples and other peoples of color and immigrants who we did these atrocities to. And that's all I'm going to say on the subject. I'm going to leave it here, and I'm not going to mention it anymore in this video or the video tomorrow. So you can comment all you want on it if you decide, but I'm not going to engage there, and I'm not going to engage anymore in this video past this point. So with that out of sight, today's video, I'm going to cover a lesser known event in U.S. history, the Texas Cherokee War, which is the premise of this video, obviously, the Texas Cherokee War, the rise and fall of the Texas Cherokee. So who were the Texas Cherokee? Well, for one thing, they were a group of Cherokee who settled in Texas under the leadership of this individual, whose name in Cherokee is Diwali. Now, any Cherokee watchers and viewers who are viewing this video right now, please feel free to comment and correct me on any mispronunciations I used either on this image or other historical individuals. But Diwali is also known as the Bull or Chief Bulls. And he was an individual who first earned his fame in the Chickamauga Cherokee Wars as one of the warriors under the leadership of Dragon Canoe, the founder of the Chickamauga Cherokee, who fought in a war against the U.S. From 1775 to 1794. Unfortunately, this war, while it did see quite a few successes, did not end in the Cherokee victory. A treaty was signed in 1794 that ceded more Cherokee lands, but also was supposed to give some provisions to the Cherokee Nation as a whole. And of course, as we know, and as discussed in my first video on the Cherokee Nation and the Trail of Tears, most Cherokee did stay in the Cherokee homelands until between 1835 and 1838, depending on the group. However, some Cherokee began viewing it, especially veterans, began viewing it important to go ahead and move out west to escape white encroachment because they felt that it was never going to stop. Sequoia is a good example of this, but also the subject of this video, Diwali, or Chief Bowles. And so in 1809, under this belief, Diwali moved his followers, many Cherokee, over to this territory right here, the Missouri Territory, in 1809, before eventually moving a little further south to this territory, the Arkansas Territory. And they lived here for many years with Diwali as being the principal chief of the Cherokee. Now, eventually, his tenure as principal chief ended, and a replacement was elected. And after that, Diwali took 800 Cherokee, as well as several hundred Delaware Indians who had also migrated west with them, to the to the Mexican Republic. The Mexican Republic had since gained its independence from Spain. It had been fighting a war, in fact, for independence when Diwali moved and his followers moved into Texas in 1819. And so by 1820, 1821, Mexico had gained its independence and controlled this vast swath of territory that you have here. Fortunately, Diwali and his Cherokee and Delaware followers were able to get permission and a grant of land from the Mexican government to settle in Texas, a few miles east of modern-day Houston. And they were able to live here for quite a few years undisturbed. Unfortunately, this did not continue. In the mid-1820s, specifically 1826, a revolt from American immigrants into Texas, into the Texas province of Mexico, was begun by two brothers, specifically Hayden and Benjamin Edwards. And this rebellion become known as the Fredonian Revolt or Fredonian Rebellion. Now, it was eventually put down by the Mexican government, but quite a lot of Cherokee did join in this rebellion. Not all of them, and that should be stated very clearly, as Diwali and many of his followers were neutral. In fact, Diwali commanded them to be neutral. He did not want to get involved because he felt it would risk the safety of the Cherokee and Delaware under his leadership. But despite those orders, several war chiefs did go over to the Fredonian Revolt, which was fought over essentially the fact that Mexico did not allow slavery and they wanted slavery. There's more to that, but as always with history, it's a very complex subject and is beyond the scope of this video. But either way, that did happen, and the Fredonian Revolt actually set up the groundwork for the later Texas Revolt 10 years later. And so eventually, 10 years later, in 1836, the Texas Revolution did begin, with, again, the Cherokee remaining neutral as much as they possibly could in Texas. But as everyone knows, thanks to the incessant reminders from Texas and movies such as the Alamo and other events like the more recent History Channel special, The Rise of Texas, or whatever it's called, Texas did win. The revolt was won specifically when Sam Houston and the Texas Rangers defeated Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. And so, therefore, creating the Texas Republic. Now, what's interesting about this is while they did remain neutral, Sam Houston, the first president of Texas, actually was favorable to the Cherokee within Texas. And this is a variety of reasons. He was generally pro-American Indian as a whole, but also he had been raised by the Cherokee in his adolescence and had actually also married into the Cherokee Nation. So he saw them as sort of a family. And he brokered a lot of treaties with Diwali and the Cherokee in Delaware. And it didn't just stop there. Sam Houston also liked to use Diwali and the Cherokee in his conflicts against the Comanches in a couple of ways. One, he used them as auxiliaries with the Texas Rangers, as well as other Puebloan and other native indigenous to Texas, such as the Tonkawa tribe, which we'll cover in a little bit. But also he used Diwali and his Cherokee as emissaries to the Comanches to broker peace treaties because, one, again, Sam Houston was pro-American Indian. Two, it was just good business to make peace with the Comanches because he was a new nation. And Mexico, while having been defeated, was still very much a threat. In fact, they still remained a dominant power on the continent alongside the U.S. until the Mexican-American War. So he didn't really have time to be worrying about two threats at his borders, and so it made sense to try and broker peace treaties as much as one possibly could with a, to a point, decentralized culture such as the Comanches, therefore allowing him to focus on Mexico and the borders with Mexico. Unfortunately, the treaties with the Cherokee would not be continued after Sam Houston's term ended. And this was because of a couple of things. First, there was the Cordovan Rebellion, which was started by a former ally in the Texas Revolution under a man named Cordova, who decided he wanted more power and also wanted treaty rights that were originally promised but weren't upheld to be upheld. And so he started a rebellion that was eventually, much like the Fredonian Rebellion, put down. However, due to a variety of factors, specifically Diwali sort of playing both sides of the Texas and Mexican government, as well as the Cordovan Rebellion. The Cordovan Rebellion was instrumental on destroying these treaties with the Cherokee. And, it should be noted, I can already hear the comments. Well, this is going to pull out a lot of, oh, this means that the Cherokee couldn't be trusted, so therefore they deserved what they got, which is what they got will be something I'll cover a little further in the video. But put yourselves in Diwali's shoes and the Cherokee's shoes. They were only about 800, 900 people, and Texas was a new nation that was already, despite Sam Houston's tries, we're already breaking treaties, and we're already breaking agreements, and a lot of the Texas Council wasn't listening to them or Sam Houston. Plus, there was, already the powerful Mexican government, Mexican Republic to the south. And again, like I said a couple of minutes ago, despite winning the revolution, Mexico never stopped being a threat. And so, in the eyes of Diwali, understandably, he had no idea when the government was going to change, if, whether or not Santa Anna was going to march into Texas with an even larger army than he had during the Texas Revolution and take it back. So it makes sense for him to back all three of these parties, the Cordovan Rebellion, the Texas government, and the Mexican government. But unfortunately, that did hurt his standing with the Texas government, especially after the Cordovan Rebellion was put down. And one of the main leaders of this dissent against the Cherokee presence in Texas was this individual, Mirabeau Lamar, the second president of Texas. After Mirabeau Lamar ascended to presidency in Texas, he immediately began making plans to undermine Sam Houston's original agreements with the Cherokee, as well as trying to remove the Cherokee. And this is for a variety of reasons. One, again, he felt the treaties with the Cherokee were not valid. They had previous agreements with white settlers who had moved there, and those took precedent in his eyes. Never mind that the Cherokee were there before the white settlers. And then the most important reason, he was a former secretary under the state of Georgia when the Indian Removal Act was being drafted and passed through Congress. In fact, he is one of the individuals who helped pass a lot of laws that were sort of loopholes behind the court cases, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. They ruled that Cherokee government and other Indian governments were their own sovereign nations that the U.S. government couldn't do anything about. So he was an avid racist against Cherokee and other American Indians. So when he moved to Texas and helped in the Texas Revolution and eventually rose to prominence in the Texas government, he was not happy to see that Cherokee were there at all, and was not happy to see that the Texas government was signing treaties with these Cherokee. So he was already against them even before he was president. But thankfully, even along with the Cordovan Rebellion, he had not quite started to make his move. I mean, the Cordovan Rebellion certainly didn't help, and that's sort of what led him to sort of push for their removal and extermination, but it had not really passed then. What was the final nail in the coffin of this attempt to remove the Cherokee from Texas, despite all the Cherokee had done for them, despite helping them broker peace treaties and fight against the Comanches, despite remaining neutral in the Texas Revolution and not providing support to Texas, despite all these different things, he was always going to remove them. And this is the nail in the coffin, the Kiowa Indian Massacre, in which a family named the Kiowa family, consisting of Isaac Sr. and Jr., Alan Kiowa, and Samuel Kiowa, were massacred by the Cherokee. Now, this was not under orders of Diwali or the Cherokee government in Texas. What this is Diwali and the Cherokee government had given permission to this family to move into Cherokee lands and set up a homestead. Unfortunately, due to the events that I've mentioned previously in the video, a lot of Cherokee were not happy about this and had already sort of decided that they were going to fight the Texas government and settlers as much as they could, and this resulted in the massacre of this family. Which was very unfortunate, and as I said, was not backed by Diwali or the Cherokee government at all. But Mirabeau Lamar and the Texas government didn't care at all. They decided that enough had been enough, and sent out the military. They specifically sent out the Texas Rangers under leadership of Kelsey Douglas and Thomas Ruck, as well as several Tonkawa Indians, a couple hundred Tonkawa Indians, to aid the Texas Rangers, therefore making an army of about 500-ish. Exactly what ratio Texas Rangers to Tonkawa Indians there were, we don't know. But we do know that this was the combination, and they were under the leadership of Kelsey Douglas and Thomas Buck. And so this army marched out on June 15th of 1839 and engaged the Cherokee under the leadership of Diwali, Cherokee and Delaware under the leadership of Diwali, consisting of around 800, 700-ish. Again, what ratio the Cherokee to Delaware were, we don't know. And engaged them from June 15th to the 16th. And at first, it was going relatively well for the Cherokee. They had won a few skirmishes and had lost a few, and eventually lured the Texas Rangers onto a fortified position on the hill in Natchez, Texas. And again, this is where the sort of battle at first went well for them. They had repulsed several Texan charges and had really done well for themselves. Unfortunately, by evening of June 16th, the Texas Rangers had found a spot in the Cherokee and Delaware defenses that was not very well guarded, and so they were able to charge up the ramparts and drive them away and chase them across Texas until they went into Oklahoma. And a lot of Cherokee and Delaware died in this battle, including Diwali himself. And Diwali, poetically and unfortunately, died while holding a saber that had been previously gifted to him by Sam Houston, which says a lot about how far Texas had moved away from alliance with Cherokees and how far the Texas Cherokees had fallen. So, as I said, they were pushed into Oklahoma, which was currently Indian Territory, or so-called Indian Territory, which was divided amongst the so-called 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminoles, as well as others such as the Cheyennes and the Kiowas and the Osages, and etc. And they rejoined the Cherokee Nation. That did welcome them with open arms. And in fact, the Cherokee Nation did actually try to negotiate with Texas to allow them to give the Texas Cherokees their land back. It never happened, of course, but they did try. And also, actually, during the Civil War, which was also the American Civil War, which was also a civil war amongst the so-called 5 civilized tribes, many of these Texas Cherokee actually fled back to Texas to escape the warfare that was happening in Indian Territory, before eventually returning after the Civil War ended. So, unfortunately, to this day, despite having been there first, despite having been given land by both the Mexican and Texan government, the Texas Cherokees were pretty much par for the course, mistreated, had broken treaties, and were eventually hunted down under the attempts of extermination and driven out of their homelands. But something to mention, this was not the end for Mirabeau Lamar. Mirabeau Lamar did eventually step down off of his presidency in disgrace, specifically due to the financial problems that were caused in his tenure as president, especially the failed Santa Fe expedition, in which he sent mostly a civilian army consisting of people such as bankers and dentists and blacksmiths, etc., along with only 300 Texas Rangers, into New Mexico in attempts to take Santa Fe and expand Mexican territory. Ended horribly. Was fraught with disease, starvation. Most people didn't even know where Santa Fe was. They were constantly attacked by Comanches and Apaches. And eventually, when they did get to Santa Fe, they were confronted with 1,500 Mexican soldiers to their only 300. So, and the army was promptly captured. A few of them were executed, and the rest were sent packing home a year later. So there is a little bit of poetic justice for Mirabeau Lamar. But of course, it was not enough, and it came a little too late, and at the expense of these Texas Cherokees. So that ends the video. As I said, it is a very unknown story that needs to be covered more. And that was my attempt at this. And I hope it is studied more in the future. So with that, remember to like, share, and subscribe the video. And I hope you have a good day. And stay tuned tomorrow for my next video about Ned Christie, a Cherokee who was framed for a murder he didn't commit and was eventually shot and executed by U.S. Marshals.